And I just put together a few things from a historical perspective about our area. And I'll go ahead and show you how greatly organized this presentation is going to be by showing you my notes. Anyway, over the last 35 years, I guess, particularly in the 80s, I collected some historical pieces about East Alton and the surrounding area. Some of them are pretty interesting. There's some pretty interesting tales. A lot of you will know, some of you might not know about. Most of them are contained in this document. There's some pretty explicit language in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch of the late 1890s. It's kind of fun to read. So I'm just going to review a few of these things that have happened here in the town over the years. Excuse me. First of all, East Alton's been known by several names before it was incorporated. One Junction, Alton Junction, Emerald, probably a few other names I may run across as I skim down through some of the notes here. The first thing is, I'm going to read some old names in here too that you'll still recognize families around today. Some of the notes that I have here are on East Alton and Milton. Milton was a settlement, basically where the Milton Cemetery in that area is around now. And East Alton pretty much came about the same time as that settlement. Our original part of town was where the credit union, community seed and feed, and that city hall area is now, was actually the original part of town back in the 1800s. I skipped where I was going to start. I didn't mark on my forms here because I didn't want to ruin them. In 1859, there was actually a plat filed the year before that by George A. Smith, George W. Carr, and Clara Carr. And the first 8 lots, not the first 8 lots, 8 lots, numbers 13 through 20, in the town of Emerald, fronting on Shamrock Street to Ridge Street. Ridge Street is now North Pence, behind the credit union. Is when that area was first settled and lots platted out. Lot number 12, apparently previous to that, was sold for $25 in prior to 1859, and $40 bought lot 11 in the town of Emerald. In 1868, there was a post office established at Alton Junction, and Alton Junction at that time boasted a population of 13 people. Alton Junction, again, is in that same area where the railroad was. The railroad had a big influence on the development of the original town in Alton. In 1836, the Alton and Shawneetown Railroad was started. And in 1837, the Illinois and St. Louis Railroad was started. Alton Junction, which is the area behind Community Seed and Feed, across from Beale Manufacturing, is where Alton Junction was. That was the railroad depot and baggage house and everything was there. One of those has since burned down in the early 80s, and the other one finally had to be demolished because of neglect over the years. In In that time frame, local residents had a train between East Alton and Alton. At that time, it was called the Plug. Some of you may have had grandparents that talked about the Plug, or even parents. I've heard that mentioned in my name, as well as the Interurban, which came along a few years later. And that was set up to get people from Alton to East Alton, and then also to Standard Oil when it was founded. Especially when it was raining and the roads were muddy and rutted, people rode the trains back then. I gotta find my other article here. 1898, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was 32 pages that day. But there was an article that day of January 22nd about the one disaster. How many of you have heard about the one disaster? I know I'll see some hands. Oh, not as many as I thought. The one disaster took place along the Big Four Railroad. That's what the one junction and the railroads finally became known as. There's the Big Four Railroad. Some oil cars derailed, apparently at the fault of a switchman who was never seen again. And cars exploded. It did burn several people, killed several people. And there's some rather colorful things, the way they wrote back in 1898. I'm going to read, if I can remember where I saw them, a couple of depictions from the newspaper here. Descriptions of a horrible scene furnished by eyewitnesses. James Mullane, the postmaster at the one station, was one of the witnesses of the terrible explosion. He said that as soon as he saw the cars on fire, he went to the hill on which the stockyards are located and took up a position near the houses to the rear of the pens. Kind of tells you what that area was like at that time. The explosions came so suddenly and so unexpectedly that there was no escaping the terrible consequences. There was a splitting sound, he said, a flash of light, and almost in a twinkling the entire multitude appeared to be enveloped in a sheet of flames. That's not the time. Men and boys with their clothes afire run wildly here and there, or threw themselves on the ground and rolled over and over again. Somebody was teaching stop, drop, and roll back then. I can't get to the part, and I won't waste time looking for it here, but it graphically describes in a couple of places the people running down the tracks and taking their burning clothes off as they go. And there was some really descriptive words in there. I just can't find them right now. I'll leave these around up here for a few minutes afterwards. That's one of the exciting things that happened prior to the actual incorporation of East Alton as a town. Two houses were burned to ashes from the flames of the explosion. One was Jesse Jones and the other John Bright. 18 cars were burned and the property loss was placed at $100,000. And the House Committee of the Illinois General Assembly in 1893 found the railroad to be to blame. Catch up here. Here's something that was really interesting. Where East Alton Plaza is now, some of you are old enough like me to remember Arlen's. so you know what I'm talking about. In the 1870s, that area was owned by Zephaniah Joe, who, according to my abstract of title in my house, went crazy somewhere along the line, and that's how the property got divided that he sold, or his family sold. In the 1870s, there was, let's see what they called it, a mile track with a hotel and a grandstand. And races were apparently held there from the drawings found in the pages of Brinks and McCormick. I'm assuming that's some kind of a historical. Anybody know anything about Brinks and McCormick? Okay, that was my question to you. Apparently they're a historical gathering place of some kind. Apparently the racetrack was for harness races like we have today. And it's hard for me to imagine that being down there. Of course, I'm only from the 50s up, so. In 1892, a young engineer came to Alton looking for a place to establish a business and produce blasting powder, and that was Franklin W. Olden. And the Equitable Powder Manufacturing Company then was founded in February of 1903. It was in operation, located along the creek where you see the main buildings down there now. The business boomed. People from Chicago were coming down for jobs, and Mr. Olden built a hotel to house those people, where you see the shot tower down there today. And they were housed there until the early 1900s. Back as early as the late 1800s, early 1900s, Mr. Olden, still a family-run business, was investing in other businesses and bringing them in. And the name of the company changed to some different chemical operations. It ended up being the Western Cartage Company. They bought out some other companies in New Haven in the 1930s. And they've been operating in that location ever since. Mr. Olden, the original Mr. Olden, died in 1951 at the age of 91. Now I don't have the date here. There's also, I'll call it a legend because it's referred to as a legend in many places. And you don't hear much of it anymore. Up until about the 90s, I used to hear people talk about the woman in black every once in a while. Anybody know the woman in black story? Couple, okay. This woman, who is a legend exclusive to East Alton, is appropriately called the woman in black in this legend, has been passed by word of mouth by the powder mill workers whom it concerned. I'm going to read this word for word, or I won't make sense of it. According to the legend, originally, a figure, supposedly a woman, was seen shrouded conspicuously in trailing black skirts with a large black hat and flowing waist-length veil draped over her 6-foot frame. She first reputedly made her appearance along the powder mill fence before the turn of the century, and workers, noting her ghostly appearance, supposed it to be the wife of one of the out-of-town workers seeking her husband, from whom she was estranged. However, in a short time, the powder mill was wrecked by an explosion, and the woman in black was promptly blamed. Through the years, according to the on-oath statements of persons who say they have seen her, whenever the woman in black made her sinister appearance, an explosion at the powder mill always followed. One local resident swore he would shoot her on sight. But one moonlit night, about midnight, when he suddenly realized the figure approaching him was the woman in black, he was so petrified, he hurried on and left her unmolested, reporting her passing was like a cold wind swishing past. I've heard, let me go ahead and finish this first. Further bearing out the appearance of the midnight stroller on moonlight nights was a newcomer to town who, one hot day in July 1923, had reported seeing a strange woman about 6 feet tall, clad in black and flowing black veil. Coincidentally, a tragic explosion at Western Cartridge followed the next day. Thus, the woman in black remains an unsolved East Alton mystery, more intriguing than explainable, and still believed by some to be true. In fact, one old-timer remembers when he was a child that they were scared to go down to the Powder Mill Road, even in the daytime unless accompanied, for fear of this strange woman in black. There were some explosions past the 1923 that I've had different people that work down there carrying the legend on, saying that workers had spotted the woman in black even in the 50s and the 70s and the 80s when there were explosions there. So that's kind of a curious legend. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Let's see. Any other real good tidbits? The woman in black and the one disaster was the main thing. I wanted to try to keep alive kind of interesting history and legends for the village. And now that you've heard it, maybe you'll go look something up about it. Maybe you won't. Another big thing that happened, I wish Mark Special was here today, he'd like this one. In 1910, there was a huge fire at the Beale facility, which is still where it is today. And that fire in the Beale facility was the marking point of when they started discussing whether there should be a fire department in town or not. Apparently it completely burned down, and from the very brief things that I have on it, must have been a really disastrous fire at the time. I have a few other small articles, a little more recent history. At this page, you're welcome to skim through for a few minutes. Maybe you can find some of the colorful language that didn't pop out to me. These are things and some pictures of things in our original town at the turn of the century. Not this century, but a century ago. Interesting things to look at.